We'll begin with the dry stock powder, which I make in a pestle and mortar. I start by finely chopping 2 dried bay leaves. If you have a spice blender you could use, then you can probably skip this step. But if you're grinding by hand as I do, then this definitely makes it easier to get a finer powder. Next, I add 1 teaspoon of ground fennel seeds and 1 tablespoon of pink Himalayan salt. Grind these 3 ingredients together first so that you can really work the salt to help break down the bay leaves and fennel seeds. I prefer to remove any woody bay stalks that don't grind down fully. Keep going to create as fine a powder as possible before adding in the rest of the ingredients. Sprinkle in 1 teaspoon of dried sage, 1 teaspoon of dried thyme, 1 teaspoon of asafoetida, 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, 1 teaspoon of ground turmeric, 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper, a sprinkle of smoked salt if you can find it, and 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast. Grind everything together as finely as possible. It can take a few minutes to get it to the stage we're looking for, so be patient. After a quick taste test, I decided it needed some sweetness, so I added 1 teaspoon of brown sugar and continued to grind. This smoky, savoury powder is a perfect low FODMAP substitute for stock cubes. For maximum flavour, sprinkle 1 teaspoon while sautéing your veg before adding your liquid of choice. This powder will store for months in a small jar and is great for taking with you on self-catering holidays to add a boost of flavour to any dish. Experiment with your favourite herbs and spices and let me know in the comments below what combinations you come up with. Next up is frozen bouillon cubes, made from the trimmings and peelings left over from your regular meal prep. This is not an exact science, but I use a mix of wilted herbs and stalks, a small amount of celery tops, which you can leave out if you're particularly sensitive. I also add woody kale stalks and a variety of peel and tops, such as parsnip and carrot. The most important thing is that everything you include is edible and well tolerated, as you'll be eating about 1 tablespoon in your finished meal. Once all your veg has been thoroughly washed, you'll need to break it down into a fine paste. The easiest way to do this is in several small batches in a food processor. Tip each batch into a large bowl and continue until all the veg has been broken down. It doesn't need to be perfect at this stage, as you'll be blending again once you add the salt. Give it a good mix together to combine the different batches. I started with 630 grams of trimmings and ended up with 610 grams of finely ground veggies. To this I added 20 grams of salt, which is significantly lower than most of the bouillon recipes I saw online, but I just couldn't bring myself to add 200 grams of salt to anything. Feel free to increase this quantity according to taste, and if you'd like to freeze it as a scoopable powder. After adding the salt, blend again for a few minutes. It's at this stage that the mixture becomes more of a paste and starts to resemble a typical bouillon cube. The best way to freeze a stock paste is to spoon 1 tablespoon portions into ice cube trays. Each one of these is the equivalent of 1 low salt bouillon cube, so portioning them like this makes perfect sense for recipes. I ended up with the equivalent of 36 tablespoons of bouillon. As an experiment, I tried freezing some of the stock in a tub, but I don't recommend it for this low salt version. You'll get a much better result from freezing it in individual portions. You can see here that due to the insufficient ratio of salt, the stock has pretty much frozen solid. If you're looking for it to be loose and scoopable, experiment with ever-increasing quantities of salt and dilute appropriately before use. The ice cube portions have frozen perfectly. Although these still need to be diluted, I think that the lower salt content makes them much more versatile for use in recipes for one, or where you're not planning to add large amounts of liquid to the final dish. And finally, onto the liquid stock. This recipe is perfect for using up all the scraps you wouldn't usually eat. Things such as the hard tops of root veggies, tomato vines and dried up ginger peel. Try to get a nice mixture of scraps, and if you can tolerate it, you could even add garlic or onion skins. Finally, chop everything together in a food processor and add to a slow cooker or deep stew pot. To 400 grams of veg pulp, I added 1.2 litres of filtered water. Allowing for reduction, this leaves approximately 1 litre of finished stock. Simmer in a slow cooker for up to 6 hours or on the stove for at least an hour on low. Once the stock is cooked and cooled, you'll need to strain out the vegetable pulp. I use a fine mesh sieve inside a colander over a large sturdy bowl. To extract as much liquid as possible, press the pulp down firmly with a potato masher. The final colour of the stock will vary depending on the types and ratio of veg scraps that you use. Keep the stock in the fridge for up to 48 hours. Alternatively, it can be frozen for up to a month. This stock is purely vegetable based, so I do recommend adding salt, herbs and spices to complete the final dish. Let me know your favourite low FODMAP stock recipes in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching and I'll speak to you soon. Bye!